Have you ever been in a meeting or a negotiation and said something smart or insightful, or perhaps offered a suggestion that would resolve the conflict that your organization is currently facing, only to have it followed by silence? Or perhaps following the silence, another person speaks about this idea as though he were claiming it as his own, and then you find yourself deflated. If this has happened to you, you're not alone. It unfortunately is quite common. You see, women's voices are not always heard in meetings. And there's quite a bit of evidence that supports my statement that women are often talked over or ignored. And part of that, as you'll see in a moment, comes a bit from others' expectations of leadership being a masculine thing. And so women who speak and present themselves in ways that are leader-like are in fact not leader-like, and for that reason not heard. Another reason, as you'll see in a moment, comes from within, and we'll talk about that momentarily. In this short presentation, I'm going to share with you 3 strategies that you can use to amp up your and other women's careers, and they are amplifying, mobilizing, and platforming. These challenges that I alluded to, as I mentioned, come both from outside women in the context in which they operate, as well as from within. So first of all, this idea that women aren't heard partly is attributed to the fact in Western and other societies, the view of leadership is still a masculine view. And so there are some who can't hear women because they don't fit the mold of a male voice or a male leader. Those voices are too shrill. The women are too bossy and unleaderlike, and therefore they're not heard or just simply ignored. Women also experience mansplaining. And if you don't know what that term means, I'll mansplain it for you. It's when someone, typically a man, explains in a very patronizing way something that not only a woman already knows, it perhaps is her own experience, and it's rather frustrating. From within, women also experience these challenges. They're afraid of the backlash. They've seen, they've heard, they've felt themselves that when they have spoken up, been assertive, asserted their opinion, there's been this backlash. And this is not just anecdotal. There is a fair bit of research evidence that shows, for example, women who negotiate their starting salaries are more respected than those who do not negotiate their starting salaries, but they're less liked. So this backlash, being bossy, being bitchy, is something that women in some cases have decided not to speak up rather than face that kind of negativity from their colleagues. Women also suffer from the problem that they are either too humble or just not aware of their value. They haven't looked outside, or they haven't been comfortable asserting the value that they are worth, whether it's in an hourly fee or in a salary. And maybe you recognize what I'm saying. Women also have the challenge of, again, being in this Western culture where bragging is unladylike. And so rather than preface a comment by saying, well, in the 20 years since I've been doing this, they'll self-censor because they realize that that's not appropriate. And so they just shy away from that kind of behavior. And finally, there are some women who are quite clear about their value, but perhaps they don't think it's necessary. You know, my abilities will speak for themselves. I don't need to brag on myself. I don't need to tell you what I've done, where I've been, what deals I've landed. And so this is an unfortunate situation, coupled with some other recent research that suggests that women systematically not only undervalue themselves, but they undervalue their performance when compared to male counterparts, their performance and their potential future. So this idea of bragging, per se, becomes a metric of, I may not be as good as I think I am, so I won't say that. And that's very different from the way men approach such situations. So the first of these tools is amplifying. And as the name implies, it's adding volume. And what that means in practice is this. When there are crickets, when there is dead space following an idea from one of your female colleagues, rather than allow somebody else to jump in and kind of claim this idea as their own, you might restate the idea for them and identify the speaker. So, for example, as Jill said, this idea of doing blah, 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 right? Or perhaps if another woman wasn't quick enough in doing that, and Bob's already kind of seemingly claimed the idea as his own, you might say something like, hey, Bob, great way to build on Gina's idea to bring all the clients together in one room. All right, so these amplifying ideas are successful because it's not the woman herself who says, hey, I already said that, adding more to the belief that she's being shrill and unladylike and bitchy. When another woman does it for you, it then becomes okay, and you're not subject to the backlash. And the other nice thing about amplifying is that you can have a conversation with a colleague prior to a meeting and strategize and plan to do this in the coming meeting. So it's look out for me, I'll look out for you, and be mindful of those dead spaces, those others claiming your ideas, and you can rest assured that somebody else with whom you've planned will have your back and will bring this up for you. So that's amplifying. Mobilizing, again, as it sounds, is kind of putting the women into motion. And getting them in the game is a great way to help women's voices be heard. One simple way of doing that in a meeting is, again, recognizing that women are loath to bring up their experience or their accomplishments or their expertise. You might do that by providing a softball to another woman. So the group may be talking about entering a new market, and you happen to know that Monique in her previous job was very successful in introducing a new product or service. And so you might say something like, this is a great idea. Hey, Monique, didn't you do something very similar to this in the last company you worked for? So that softball, or that low-hanging fruit, you pick your metaphor, is a great way to allow a woman to be mobilized and heard in the meeting. Another thing that you can do is use your process or facilitation skills to help bring out a silent or perhaps a shy member. Now, again, why this person is not speaking up is maybe not always clear to you, but when someone attempts to facilitate by saying, do we all agree? It's not as direct as looking at Gina and saying, well, we've been talking about this plan. What are your thoughts on it, Gina? And you might have even noticed with her body language, kind of sinking in her seat or rolling her eyes or being uncomfortable about it. And again, some women have trained themselves to not speak up. And then, as you know, there's that meeting after the meeting when they do. So like amplifying, facilitating is a great way to bring somebody out when they need to be brought out, and it can be part of a strategic plan that you have with another colleague. Now, outside the meeting, another great way to mobilize other women, and you may already do this, is making an introduction to someone in your network. Because you know of their experience, because you know of their intention to move out of one industry and into another, you may go ahead and make an introduction either face-to-face or via an email. And again, we do this naturally because we are helping one another, and it kind of sets up the tit for tat. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. So platforming is the third strategy. And as the name suggests, when you are standing on a platform, you've been given greater height, you've been given greater visibility. And in the case of credibility, we know that it is absolutely essential in order to be influential or persuasive. And there's a lot of research in this area. We could do it ourselves by introducing ourselves with the relevant expertise and accomplishments. However, that goes against the Western norm. But by doing it for someone else, by platforming another woman, introducing her in terms of, hey, I want you to meet Kristen. She has spent the last 15 years putting together a social media campaign when our company entered into European markets. She doesn't have to feel that discomfort of bragging, and she also doesn't have to experience that blowback of, oh, wow, she's really, speaking about herself in this way. So this idea of platforming for another woman, introducing another woman with her relevant expertise, accomplishments, etc., this is a really great way to help them and help yourself in the process, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So this idea is validating. Everything that follows the platform is seen as more credible. So as I kind of alluded to, when we engage in these strategies for other women, we help ourselves because there is this natural tendency to reciprocate. And moreover, when others see this model, they begin to emulate it. So good luck. Practice amplifying, mobilizing, and platforming. It'll not only help others, it'll help you amp up your career.